In April 1956, Grace Kelly sailed into the harbor of Monaco on an ocean liner called the Constitution, wearing a floral dress and a wide-brimmed hat, surrounded by 150 journalists and a film crew that MGM had insisted accompany her because they intended to document the whole thing as publicity. She was 26 years old. She was the most famous actress in Hollywood. She had won the Academy Award for Best Actress 18 months earlier. She had made 11 films in 5 years, worked with Hitchcock 3 times, been photographed by every major magazine in the world, and had been described in print as the most beautiful woman in America, with a frequency that had ceased to feel like a compliment and had begun to feel like a category she was being placed into whether she wanted to be there or not. She was sailing into Monaco to marry a man she had met once, for a total of approximately 30 hours at the Cannes Film Festival the previous year. His name was Rainier Louis-Henri Maxence Bertrand Grimaldi, and he was the sovereign prince of Monaco, a principality of less than 2 square kilometers on the French Riviera, a tax haven and casino economy that had been ruled by the Grimaldi family since 1297. He was 32 years old, not particularly handsome, not particularly warm in the first impression, a man who had grown up inside the obligations of hereditary rule and who had come to the Cannes Film Festival in 1955, partly because his advisors had suggested that a high-profile marriage to an American celebrity might be good for Monaco's international profile. She said yes. The reasons were complicated, as reasons always are when a decision looks simple from the outside and contains, on the inside, years of accumulated context. Grace Patricia Kelly was born on November 12, 1929, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was the third of 4 children of John Brendan Kelly, a self-made millionaire who had won 3 Olympic gold medals in rowing and who was, by the time Grace was born, one of the most prominent men in Philadelphia society. He was also one of the most difficult fathers his children would ever have to navigate. John Kelly had opinions about what his children were supposed to be and what they were supposed to achieve. And these opinions were delivered with the full force of a man who had achieved everything he had achieved through will and relentless effort, and who saw softness as failure. He had wanted a son who would be an athlete. He got Peggy, then John Jr., then Grace, then Lisanne. John Jr. was the son he had hoped for, but not quite the athlete. Grace was the daughter he had not expected to amount to much. She was shy as a child, quiet in the way of children who observe more than they participate. She had a quality of attention, watchful, careful, absorbing, that would later make her extraordinary in front of a camera, but that as a child simply made her seem less vivid than her siblings. Her father called her the boring one, which was not said with malice, but was said and was heard and left a mark. She had a passion for acting from an early age. She performed in school plays, in local theatre, in anything available to her. This was not encouraged by her father, who considered acting an unsuitable occupation for a Kelly, not respectable in the way that business and sport were respectable. She went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York at 18 over her father's objections and began the process of becoming what she had always understood herself to be. She was in New York for 4 years before Hollywood found her. She did modeling. She had the kind of face that cameras loved in a very particular way. The bone structure and the skin and the eyes that in black and white were almost impossibly perfect. And she did theatre, and she did television work, and she studied seriously and with the discipline of someone who understood that the talent was real, but that craft was what kept it working. She was 21 when she made her first film. By 24, she was working with Gary Cooper and Clark Gable and James Stewart. By 25, she was Hitchcock's obsession. He made 3 films with her in 3 years, Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, To Catch a Thief, and said afterward that she was the only actress he had ever worked with who could project both sexuality and reserve simultaneously, which was the specific quality he needed for the roles he kept writing. She won the Oscar for The Country Girl in 1954, a film in which she played a woman married to an alcoholic, a role that required her to be unglamorous and ungraceful, and entirely without the surface that made her famous, which she did with a completeness that surprised people who had categorized her as a face, rather than an actress. She was 25 years old and she was the most celebrated actress in Hollywood, and she was, by the accounts of people close to her at the time, not particularly happy. The unhappiness was specific rather than general. She had what she had worked for. She had the career, the recognition, the proof that she was more than the boring Kelly daughter with the unsuitable ambitions. Her father had attended the Oscar ceremony and had told her afterward that he was proud of her, which was the thing she had wanted from him since she was old enough to understand that she wanted it. She had gotten it. What she didn't have was what the roles she was playing kept depicting: the private life, the love, the sense of being chosen by someone who saw her entirely, not the surface, not the category, not the MGM contract, and the perfect bone structure and the name that was beginning to mean something on its own. She had relationships. Several, some of which became publicly known and some of which didn't. She was attracted to older men, a pattern that her biographers have connected with varying degrees of confidence to her relationship with her father. Men who were established, who had power, who occupied the center of their professional world the way her father had occupied the center of his. Clark Gable, with whom she worked on Mogambo, Bing Crosby, with whom she worked on The Country Girl, Ray Milland, whose marriage made the relationship a scandal rather than a romance. She was not careless with these attachments. She was, if anything, serious about them in a way that the men involved sometimes were not. She fell genuinely, and she expected to be fallen for genuinely, and the gap between what she offered and what was offered back was a recurring disappointment. She had also, by 1955, begun to feel the particular claustrophobia of extreme celebrity. She could not go anywhere without being recognized, without the cameras, without the management of the image that was becoming, at 25, more exhausting than the work itself. MGM owned her contract. MGM decided what roles she played, what she wore in public, who she was seen with, what version of Grace Kelly the public received. She was a product of an industrial system that was very good at making products, and that had very little interest in the person underneath the product. She had begun to think about leaving, not yet, not concretely, but the thought was there, forming the way thoughts form before they become decisions. She met Prince Rainier at the Cannes Film Festival in April 1955. The meeting was arranged, not by either of them exactly, but by the circumstances of the festival and the specific coincidence of both of them being in the same place at a moment when Paris Match magazine wanted to photograph an American film star at the Palace of Monaco. Grace was initially reluctant. She had another commitment. Her clothes were not ready. The hotel had lost her luggage. She arrived at the palace an hour late in a borrowed dress, with no time to have her hair done properly. Rainier received her in the palace gardens. He showed her around. He had animals, rare birds, a lion cub, and she was charming with them, and he was charming with her, and the photographs that resulted showed two people in a garden who appeared to be genuinely enjoying each other's company rather than performing for Paris Match, which they were, or something close enough to it. She returned to Hollywood. He wrote to her. She wrote back. The correspondence continued for months, letters between a princess of Hollywood and a prince of Monaco, finding, in the careful language of letters, something that the 30 hours in the palace garden had suggested might be worth pursuing. He visited her family in Philadelphia in December 1955. He brought a priest, which the Kelly family understood as serious. He asked her father for her hand, the formal request, conducted in the old manner, which John Kelly appreciated deeply, and John Kelly gave his approval, and the engagement was announced to a world that responded with the specific delight of a culture that had been waiting for exactly this story without knowing it was waiting for it. A movie star becoming a real princess. The American dream made literal. She made one more film, The Swan, released in 1956, in which she played a princess who falls in love with a commoner. This was not accidental. MGM had the property in development and moved it forward quickly when the engagement was announced, understanding that the casting had acquired a meta-dimension that was worth exploiting. She played the role with a technical competence that was, by then, automatic and with something else visible underneath, a quality of preparation, perhaps, of using the role to think about what she was about to become. She gave up her contract. She gave up the Oscar. She gave up the career that had been the project of her adult life, the proof she had been assembling for her father, and for herself that she was more than the boring Kelly daughter with the unsuitable ambitions. She said in interviews given before the wedding that she was ready, that she had always wanted a family more than she had wanted a career, that the role of wife and mother was one she looked forward to. Her friends, who knew her better than the interviews reflected, said she was not entirely sure that the leaving of Hollywood was not as clean as she presented it, that there was grief in it alongside the excitement, grief for the work, for the creative life, for the specific freedom that being an actress had given her, that being a princess was not going to replicate. She sailed into Monaco harbor on the Constitution on April 12, 1956. The film crew documented the arrival. The harbor was full of boats. The principality was decorated. 20,000 people waited on the shore. She became Princess Grace on April 19, 1956, in the civil ceremony. The religious ceremony followed on April 20th. She wore a dress designed by Helen Rose of MGM, the studio's wedding gift, the last thing they would give her, made of silk taffeta and Brussels lace and rose point lace, with a high neck and long sleeves, and a skirt that was as much architecture as clothing. It remains one of the most copied wedding dresses in history. She walked down the aisle in the Cathedral of St. Nicholas in Monaco and married her prince. The cameras were there, of course. They were always there. The first years were difficult in ways she had not fully anticipated. Monaco was small. This sounds like a minor thing until you understand what small means for someone who had spent 5 years moving between New York, Los Angeles, and the major cities of Europe as the most celebrated actress of her generation. Small meant that the social world was contained and repetitive. Small meant that there was no city to disappear into, no anonymity available, even in the ordinary sense that a large city provides anonymity. Small meant that the court, the officials and advisors and staff who surrounded the palace and organized the principality's functions was close and watchful and full of opinions about how the new princess was conducting herself. She did not speak French well when she arrived. This was a significant disability in a court that conducted itself in French and that had opinions, some of them unkind, about the American actress who had come to marry their sovereign. She applied herself to French with the same discipline she had applied to acting, but the learning took time, and the court had time to observe her learning and to have its opinions. Rainier was not easy. This is stated carefully by those who have written about him most honestly. He was not cruel. He was not indifferent. He loved Grace in the genuine way that was available to him, which was the way of a man who had been raised inside the obligations of hereditary rule and who understood love primarily as loyalty and presence. He was not expressive. He did not explain himself. He had been running a principality since he was 26, and he had developed the self-sufficiency of someone who had always had to make decisions alone. Grace, who had needed to be seen and chosen and known with a specificity that her father had never provided, found herself in a marriage with a man who loved her but did not particularly know how to express it in the terms she needed. She did not go back. This is important to say. She made the choice, and she kept the choice, which was consistent with who she was and with the Kelly stubbornness that ran through her father's family. She had decided. She did not undecide. She had 3 children, Caroline in 1957, Albert in 1958, Stephanie in 1965. She devoted herself to them with the same discipline she had devoted to her career. She was the kind of mother who was present, who paid attention, who took the role seriously in the way she had taken every role seriously, which is to say she understood what it required, and she gave what it required, and she did not allow the difficulty of it to be an excuse for giving less. She also did what she had always done. She found the work available to her, and she did it well. The charitable work of the principality, there was a great deal of it. The formal apparatus of a royal household requires a significant and continuous engagement with charitable causes she approached with genuine investment rather than performative attendance. She created the Princess Grace Foundation, which supported young artists and artisans. She revived the Garden Club of Monaco into a serious organization for the cultivation of flowers, which she had loved since childhood. She pursued these things with the attention she had always given to things that mattered to her. She was not allowed to make films. This was understood early and never fully negotiated. Rainier did not want his wife making films, appearing on screens, being the object of the world's gaze in the way that an actress is the object of the gaze. She could perform publicly as a princess. She could not perform publicly as an actress. She did, occasionally, read poetry. She created and toured a program called A Bouquet of Poetry and Music in the 1970s and 1980s. A formal recitation program in which she appeared on stage and performed poetry selection. It was not a film. It was not acting in the full sense. But it was her, in front of an audience, doing something with her voice and her presence that had nothing to do with the principality or the charitable schedule or the expectations of the court. She was using the muscles that would have atrophied otherwise. Hitchcock called her. Several times over the years, he wanted her back. He was developing a film called Marnie in the early 1960s, and he wrote the role for her, not in the sense of saying publicly that it was for her, but in the sense that people who knew him understood that the quality of presence he was writing toward was her quality. The combination of surface and depth, the reserve and the sexuality, the face that the camera had always known what to do with.
She considered it. Rainier said no. The court said no. Monaco's citizens, when word leaked that the princess might return to films, were sufficiently vocal in their objection that the consideration became impossible. She withdrew from the project. Tippi Hedren played Marnie. Grace never made another film. The years she lost to Monaco are a question that her biographers circle differently depending on what they believe about the nature of a life well lived. Some see the sacrifice clearly, the career abandoned, the artistic identity submerged, the specific freedom of the creative life traded for the gilded constraint of a principality.
Some see the life she built in Monaco as its own achievement, the family, the charitable work, the principality's transformation under Rainier's rule and her contribution to it, the things she built that could not be built on a film set. Both are true. She knew both were true. She was too intelligent not to know it, and the intelligence that had made her extraordinary on screen did not switch off when the cameras stopped. She said in interviews, when she gave interviews, that she was happy. She said it with a consistency that was either genuine or was the performance of a woman who had been trained since childhood to give interviewers what they needed, probably both. The happiness she expressed was likely real, in the complicated way that happiness is real when it exists alongside things that are also real: the grief for the work, the constraint of the court, the marriage that was loyal and present, and not quite what she had needed. She said once to a journalist who asked whether she missed Hollywood, "I dress to please my husband, and I wear my hair the way he likes it, but inside," she gestured at herself, "this is still mine." She died on September 14, 1982. She was 52 years old. She was driving on the mountain road above Monaco, the Corniche, the coastal road that winds above the Principality, in curves that are beautiful and dangerous, in exactly the proportion that such roads usually are, with her daughter Stephanie in the passenger seat. Something happened. The accounts differ in their specifics: a brake failure, a small stroke, a moment of inattention on a road she had driven many times. The car went off the road and fell down the mountainside. Stephanie survived with injuries. Grace died the following day of brain hemorrhage. The Principality went into mourning. The world went into mourning in the specific way that the world mourns a person who has been part of its cultural furniture for decades, not with the raw grief of someone recently loved, but with the particular sadness of something beautiful and familiar now absent. Rainier was broken by it. The man who had been described for 26 years as reserved and formal and difficult to read was, in the weeks and months after her death, simply devastated in a way that was visible and that surprised people who had not realized, watching from the outside, how much the marriage had meant to him. He never remarried. He lived for 23 more years, and he did not replace her. What she was not only the fairy tale, though the fairy tale was real in its way. She was not only the sacrifice, though the sacrifice was real in its way. She was a woman of considerable intelligence and discipline and will who had built two things: a career and a marriage that were each in themselves significant achievements, and who had found that the two things could not coexist and had made a choice. The choice had costs. She knew the costs. She paid them with the same completeness with which she paid everything, fully, without visible complaint, with the Grace Kelly composure that was part performance and part genuine character and entirely hers. Her father, John Kelly, died in 1960, 4 years after the wedding. He had lived to see her become a princess, which was not what he had wanted for her when she had left for New York at 18, and which he had come to be proud of, in the way he came to be proud of things that were not what he had planned. She had proven, to him and to herself, that she was more than the boring Kelly daughter. She had then gone further than proof, had built something, in Monaco, that was not about the proving but about the living, the actual daily practice of being the person she had become. The film she might have made after Marnie, the films she might have made through the 1960s and 1970s, with the depth that her life experience would have given her, those films do not exist. Marnie exists with Tippi Hedren, and it is a good film, and it is not what it would have been. What exists instead is Monaco and the Princess Grace Foundation and the children she raised and the garden club and the poetry program and 26 years of a life that was not the life she had imagined at 25 standing in the Palace Gardens in Monaco for the first time. It was the life she chose. She was 52 years old when she died. She had never stopped being